Muted.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining the Jackson Group regarding the Key Drivers of Engagement Tools for a Healthy Organization webinar. Hopefully you can see my screen. I just want to point out a couple of things to you before we begin. First of all, we do have this PowerPoint available to you for downloading at any time under this Handouts tab. Then also, too, I would ask that if you have any questions, please type them in the question area on your screen as you see, and we will answer those as soon as the webinar presentation is actually finished. This morning I would like to introduce our speaker, Ms. Connie Saunders. She is a senior client consultant with the EmployeeINSIGHT team within the Jackson Group Incorporated. We are, by the way, located in Hickory, North Carolina, which is in the western foothills of the state. Ms. Saunders has a Bachelor of Science degree from Wake Forest University and a Master of Arts degree from Central Michigan University. Entering the healthcare field as a medical technologist, Ms. Saunders transitioned in a mid-sized North Carolina hospital and gained valuable experience directing education and marketing for 5 years. After her graduate work, she moved into healthcare human resources, where she worked for 15 years as a Chief Human Resources Officer for 2 North Carolina hospitals. Ms. Saunders has successfully designed and implemented leadership development programs. Her background and experience in employee relations, management coaching, physician relations, and team building are highlighted by the achievement of her clients. She has presented at national conferences and most recently presented Employee Engagement, What Works, at the SHRM National Strategy Conference and at a regional healthcare marketing conference entitled Enhancing Physician Relations by Using Technology to Communicate, Top 5 Ways to Sync Up with Your Patients. Her article, Managed Physician Satisfaction, or ELF, was published in the Physician Strategy News. Ms. Saunders has been with the Jackson Group for 12 years and works closely with members of the EmployeeINSIGHT team as a senior consultant, assisting clients with analyzing survey results, action planning, and developing leadership teams. I want to add, too, that even though Ms. Saunders has a breadth of information and experience in the medical field, she also has just as much experience in human resources overall. And so she will be speaking to the audience, as we know that you are in other industries other than healthcare. So right now I want to take this opportunity to thank Ms. Saunders for taking time to speak with us today about key drivers of engagement tools for a healthy organization.
Suzanne, thank you very much. It's my great pleasure, and I love to talk about engagement, have presented on it for several years, and I'm so thankful to work for the Jackson Group because as each year passes by, we do additional research using our clients' database and other sources to provide you the latest information and research on employee engagement. I also want to take this time to thank our clients who are participating in this webinar. Quite a number of them are on the registration list that we've reviewed. And I'd also like to thank the repeat participants. I noted a number of individuals participating in our last webinar on exit and stay surveying, and I'm so pleased to see you return. And then I also invite you, and we'll provide you with information, to contact us individually later as you think of questions or see needs for your organization. So I am very pleased to be here. Yesterday, as I was driving across the state, any of you that watched anything about weather yesterday, we're very fortunate to have a little damage, but a lot of coverage of tornado warnings, and I was determined to make it back. So I blew back in last night, and I'm so glad to be here with you. Just to give you a background on the Jackson Group, we've been incorporated for 40 years and have great experience in research and consulting, working with healthcare and non-healthcare clients in 38 states. And I think we're known most specifically for our flexibility to meet the needs, not using cookie-cutter approaches to surveying and consulting, our responsiveness, and of course, our customer-client service. Looking at briefly what we do, we have an employee insight team who's responsible for putting this presentation together and working in tandem with our research folks to the data for you. We also, of course, have multimedia services that we use regularly with clients so that we can embed a short video, a message to employees, information display screens throughout organizations. So a very diverse organization. And these are the types of survey services that we are most fortunate to be able to present. And one of the ones that we're seeing quite an uptick on is exit and stay surveying along with employee engagement. Then we also, of course, can cover the healthcare side with medical staff engagement, patient satisfaction, and community perception really is done for healthcare and non-healthcare, and have worked with a number of higher education organizations as well. Just about enough about us, right? So I'm pleased to dig into this content and start with a question. What is the #1 impediment to organizational success? Many of you, I'm sure, have been in organizations that have wonderful cultures and have been in organizations where there just seems to be a drain on human talent. And so that what is the #1 impediment to organization success? And you can see and probably have walked around your organizations, and I always said in HR I had antenna that I wanted to turn off sometimes because you pick up on these behaviors or what you observe in disengaged employees dealing with your clients, dealing with each other interpersonally, so that you have non-engaged or disengaged employees. You know that it's not just all or none. There can be varying levels of engagement. And when we survey, when we look at the data, what we look for is top box. When an individual strongly agrees with a survey statement, especially like my department is a good place to work, that indicates a passion and an attachment to the organization by their expressing a strongly agree. So that's what we look for in a higher percent there within our survey data. So engaged versus non-engaged versus disengaged. We're going to take some time to talk about that. And I know you could share valuable experience out there, years of human resource experience, so you can very well relate to the challenge it is for a department leader, for senior leadership, for human resources to work with those individuals that are just lukewarm, and that's the non-engaged, or the disengaged, which is even more challenging because you don't have that sense of them getting on the bus with you. You're trying to drive a bus with folks that won't even get on the bus, which would be the disengaged individual. So comparing here, employee engagement, as you can see on the screen, are those individuals that participate, that have a passion for what they do, ask questions, they come up with bright ideas. They're seen as being very creative, and you have developed an environment that encourages creativity. They are highly productive. They work at a good pace of work and come up with solutions in your organization. They have less absenteeism. They're present. In fact, one of the research projects I reviewed said that 66% less absenteeism. So they're at work. You're not having to replace them with temporaries or call in individuals to work. They work in a safer environment, so your safety metrics are better. There are less workplace accidents. In viewing how they relate to customers, in the Harvard Business Review, I noted an article that said with customer service, you have actually 0.85 correlation between views of your clients or customers and your level of engagement. They'll also have more ethical, make good decisions, and add value to the organization. In healthcare, we've determined it's related to patient safety. That, for an example, one of the biggest concerns in healthcare today, and continues, although they've worked very hard on it, is decreasing infection rates. Patients, sadly, die in hospitals because of an infection acquired. So if we have a more engaged workforce, then there is a 0.929 correlation between views of patient safety and views of their immediate work environment. So looking at some of the traits, I've mentioned a few of the traits of engaged employees. They have an enthusiasm, or as I call it, passion for the work and excitement for what they do. They feel inspired and motivated from leadership, and leadership is a part of that too. We have to learn to lead with passion and have a desire for success and celebrate their success. They also have a confidence in their work. Now, thinking about the non-engaged employee, with little motivation, they just kind of get through each day, look for each pay period. They tend to be late on deadlines, lack follow through, talk about and live for the weekends. And of course, we've all been a little guilty of that on occasion, I must say. But this employee is kind of stuck in that mode. Just they are not likely necessarily to leave. And a lot of times what I say, these people can be negative, and these people can be remotivated and engaged. They're that kind of middle of the road. So it becomes a challenge for leadership. And the other piece of it, I think we have to be clear in our expectations as leaders to indicate our expectations of employees. I call it meeting us in the middle. You know, if they don't come to the table, if we don't have that dialogue, then we as leaders have difficulty motivating this type of employee. Sometimes just thinking through and having those one-on-one dialogues to talk about how people feel about their work and what would inspire them to be more involved and engaged in their work. So traits of the non-engaged employee: not asking questions. They're the ones that, you know, leaders tell me all the time, well, I have an open door policy, I allow employees to come in. Well, this type of employee, you're going to have to schedule those one-on-ones and dig into with questions, open-ended questions, to ask them about why they don't participate in meetings. And I was telling our team this morning, interesting, I was working with a client in Eastern North Carolina, and one of the goals they set in place was for better participation in staff meetings and in some of their strategic initiative type meetings. And so they tied attendance to the meetings, certain meetings, to a bonus. And last December, a fairly large number of their population of employees did not receive a bonus. Now that's kind of the big stick, but sometimes that's necessary. So I learned from them, starting in January, attendance just skyrocketed. So a lot of it is linked to how we lead and how we set goals. So these individuals are not the best team players. They work away from the team much of the time. And so that impacts the environment, because we know teamwork assists us with better efficiency and smooth processes and operations, better communication, and is linked back to our views on pace of work in our work environment. Looking at disengagement, that person that just doesn't connect with colleagues, typically more commonly makes negative statements, and then also views communication from leadership within their department or even senior leadership in the organization in more of a negative way. And it's normally pretty challenging to re-engage this person. What I remind leaders all the time is that employees need to own their own engagement. They need to realize if they're disengaged because they haven't grown and developed in their job? Why have they stepped up to the plate and asked to be involved? I also recommend to leaders that they have regular conversations about growth and development opportunities and what individuals are interested in growing in their role within the organization. So some common traits of disengaged employees, and I know if we were in a face-to-face training session, I would ask you to describe those for me, because with your many years of experience, I'm sure you could have some really good stories on what you see with engaged employees. They tend to get into the gossip, the grapevine conversations, rather than obtaining specific information, accurate information from leadership or from their colleagues. And this tends to impact morale. And many times we see in departments that are struggling to function effectively, there can be a small department with one or two disengaged employees, and that greatly impacts the productivity and the morale. I kind of joke about using the word morale because it's not very actionable. It's out there, but I like to look at metrics that are more measurable, like productivity, on budget, their safety numbers, and all these key metrics are linked to the level of engagement of employees. They do not participate in staff meetings, and they work away from the team consistently. One other thing that we need to consider when we talk about engagement, and as leaders, we are now managing and leading employees of these 4 generations that you see on the screen, and I think we have to be very creative. In fact, I was talking to my client yesterday about communication and talking about with these mandated meetings that perhaps down the road we need to think about, and many of you probably already use the audio bridge, the call-in conference calls, because you have locations throughout the country, and we at the Jackson Group do this frequently with clients, and WebEx's, webinars like this. But sometimes organizations are slow to do that. Can we use Skype to have people who are maybe live 30 miles away to participate in meetings? Can we have an electronic dialogue such that we set it up internally? I know the Jackson Group can do this, where we monitor. We want to have an open forum, but our employees are located throughout the country, so we can have a electronic forum that people can go into and enter their comments. Now, this is not like a blog. Let me go ahead and clarify that, because we, or if you did it internally, would need to kind of monitor those comments to be sure they were appropriate. So as we're thinking, we need to think of other electronic ways to communicate as well. So let's talk about the first generation here, the veterans. And we see a large number of veterans still working in our work environment, and they're very hardworking. They respect authority. They're willing to sacrifice their family time. They have duty before fun. Work is an obligation, and they're very rule-oriented and adhere to rules quite readily. And it's interesting, if you have some veterans in your population of employees, sometimes those interpersonal conflicts you have are directly related to the differences in those generations. Baby boomers, we are still working, of course, most of us. And I tell a funny story about this. When I first came to the Jackson Group, I had left a chief human resource position to consult, and that was almost 13 years ago. I had to adjust the way I communicated, because we have a large staff of technical individuals, and I was used to more face-to-face. Well, if you pop into a network manager in their office and want a face-to-face, sometimes you get a look. And I've pretty much learned that we needed to use mixed methods of communicating, with more emailing, texting, and then we've set up other ways that electronically that we use that are internet-based, project management software and that sort of thing. So be open to changing how your normal comfortable style of communication. Tend to be workaholics, work very efficiently. We get personal fulfillment out of our work. There's a high level of quality that is needed. Sometimes you might call that perfectionism, but that's a good thing. We question authority, you know, why does this happen, you know, and we maybe seem a bit rebellious sometimes in the questions we ask, but we're not afraid to ask them. And we do believe that if we're in the right role, that work is exciting and fun and an adventure. And we will look for that and could easily become bored if that's not the case. Gen Xers, they're looking for ways to be more efficient, which is a great skill set to have. So in an organization, you would want these individuals to be looking at efficiencies and ways to enhance processes, how to automate processes. They're very self-reliant, very self-confident, and of course, I don't have any Gen Xers as far as my children, but I can see these traits in the workforce, and we've been giving them a good dose of confidence, but they do like and desire structure and direction. They will question, which is a good thing. You want to put together a team of different generations because they will be ones to question. They look at work at times as a challenge, and they will challenge the rules sometimes, and that's a good thing, again. So Gen Yers, this is the new hires that we're hiring large numbers of in most organizations. They can think very quickly. They tend to multitask, which we know is not always the best thing to do. So we'll have to train, I know we do time management training here at the Jackson Group, and so we have to look at multitasking, and is that the most productive and efficient way to operate? Not so. They tend to be tenacious. They're great entrepreneurs. So if you want to put them in research and development on a project team that is charged with developing a new product, a new service, very tolerant, they tend to be goal-oriented, very ambitious, and they're looking for a means to an end. So as we look at engagement, if we don't consider the way we organize work, the way we reward and recognize individuals, the way we set up projects in teams, we have to take into consideration the various generations. Then we also have to know that if we don't do that, that may contribute to a level of disengagement of these individuals. So with that, we know that if someone becomes disengaged, they're more likely, especially if they're in the Gen X or Gen Y, I think I read a statistic that said 7 times more likely to leave your organization if they become disengaged. And we know, based on our research of turnover, both total turnover and voluntary turnover, that is increasing. And it is a cause of concern for most organizations. Voluntary turnover you see on the left-hand side of your screen in the hospitality industry, a very high rate of 18%, and it's incrementally increasing in the last several years. Banking, healthcare is a slightly lower, 12.5%. But I know a lot of our clients are very concerned about voluntary turnover. And what's happening is when you look at the types of employees that are turning over, they may be your highest performers because they become frustrated in a work environment that has a large proportion of disengaged employees or poor communication, and they're the achievers. They want to excel and I looked at the other day one of our clients' exit data for the quarter, and I found that a large number of the exiting employees had longevity, 5, 10 years or greater longevity, and the survey results were very positive, not like we normally see with exiting employees. And so I could anecdotally say that's most likely their brain drain, their talent, their top talent leaving the organization to develop careers elsewhere in growing in their careers when perhaps there were opportunities within the organization that went unrecognized for that individual. So you can see total turnover and the cost of that is astronomical. And we went through that. If you were interested in learning more about exit and stay, we have this webinar recorded, and it is on our website. It's under the tab as you scroll across the screen, online resources. So you can tap that and it will go to the previous webinar. You'll see a blank screen, which is where I think we were polling employees and setting it up, but then you will go to the complete webinar. What causes an employee to become disengaged? And really, this is why we survey, so that you don't have to sit at your desk at 5 o'clock going, now what's not working with this department? You know, I can't quite put my finger on it. What's not working? If you're in human resources, perhaps you have what I call the squeaky wheels coming to your office with varying and sundry complaints, but you don't really know what's going on in the department, nor does the leader of that department know. There may be trust issues. In the data that we have researched, 21% do not trust their leaders. And you know, when trust is a hard thing to rebuild. And what happens sometimes when we do focus groups, I hear from employees, usually trust wanes when a leader indicates this is going to happen, and with assurance, this is going to happen on this date, and then for some reason it doesn't, or making false promises to employees, and then after a while that their trust erodes. And it is a tough one to recover on because we communicate, and I think a lot of times as leaders we try to be overly positive, and so we make promises that really are not happening and not being put into practice. 45% do not feel inspired by leaders. I see some leaders in the industry that become disengaged themselves. And so a disengaged leader cannot lead with inspiration. And on the healthcare side, on the industry side, as we've had peaks and troughs in our economy, as we've had to have downsizings, we have seen a number of industries where the leaders become so focused on the numbers, they forget the people portion of their business and the talent, and so they lead in an uninspiring way. And so one of my famous quotes was from a leader within a very large healthcare system who was going in to turn around a particular hospital, and there were a lot of projects that had to happen very quickly, from hardwiring their IT and throughout the whole organization, from reworking the phone system, from changing processes. And she was very upfront with the leadership team, and she said, this is going to be a rocky road. We have to do this very quickly. We would prefer to stretch it over time. We do not have the luxury of that. It's going to be a real challenge. But when we get finished, it is going to be so pretty. And so giving that inspiration to leaders and also managing their expectations. It'll be long hours, hard work, but it was worth it in the end, and this is how it's going to be worth it. Number one, and we see this in exit surveys, and then we see it in our database, that 52% of the individuals do not feel appreciated for their work. 23% are not included in decision making. And a great deal of the consulting we do after a survey centers around training leaders, using best practices, because some of our leaders have been in place for a long time, and they're frankly not comfortable or not used to using some of the newer methods to engage their workforce, newer ways to really drill down on appreciation. How do we involve employees in decision making? When I'm working with leaders, frequently I hear, well, I have meetings and they have the opportunity to become involved, but no one will say anything. No one speaks up. No one volunteers. There are methods that we can use as leaders to facilitate how people get involved, how they will feel comfortable speaking up, and then we have to reward that input. what drives engagement? The Jackson Group in recent years has really developed some fine tools statistically to run correlation studies to determine in our database, and that's what we will be talking about today, a very large, robust database of 159,000 employees. And in that data, we have researched what are the key drivers of engagement. Now, I will say, when we work with clients, we use their data as the database. We always compare it to our database, but we want to determine what drives engagement in your culture. You've worked hard on developing a culture in your organization, and so we want to use your specific data because it's not cookie cutter key drivers. Yes, there's some common threads and trends, and we see that in our database, but just like yesterday, I was looking at service workers within an organization, and one of the key drivers was the benefits of the organization. We don't commonly see that, but that tells me in that population, within that culture, it's very important to them. So we need to be sure that we are making action plans that incorporate information about benefits. So what we do is we take two statements within our pool of statements. One is linked more to the work environment. The other one is linked to overall satisfaction. The one we use for the work environment is that my work area or department is a good place to work. And when someone strongly agrees with this statement, that indicates a high level of engagement. And then the second one, I enjoy working in my work area. Three consistent themes were found in this correlation study. And in looking at preparing this PowerPoint for today, we really wanted to focus on top three. We didn't want to bury you in the data, but I will let you know that if we have the opportunity to identify your key drivers in your culture, then we usually select 5 that link to the views on the immediate work environment and 5 that link to views on general overall satisfaction and engagement. For employees, those are in non-leadership staff positions, the number one was I am appreciated for what I do, which had a high correlation of 0.65. And just a little bit of a tidbit on statistics, because again, we don't want to make you statisticians, but you want to be sure you understand, and many of you I'm sure out there do. Correlation is a linkage research. It is saying that if you increase a score on this particular topical question, it is highly likely to influence that question that indicates overall satisfaction, engagement, and positive views of the workplace. The highest correlation would be a 1.0 in a positive correlation. A negative correlation, meaning a negative 1.0, means they're not at all related. There's no link between. They're totally separate views. So the correlation here, 0.65, is high. And generally, most of the questions in our surveys are correlated to engagement. That's why we ask them. But they can, and many of the studies I look at have a very high, 0.7, 0.8. And so what we try to do is to separate out for you and prioritize what's most important to work on of all these opinions and perceptions in your work environment. The person to whom I report tries to be sensitive to each employee's individual situation. Another high correlation, 0.64. And that makes sense. You know, for years we've used that almost cliche, that quote that people join organizations, but they leave leadership. So a lot of what drives engagement is that relationship that the individual has with leadership. For those in nursing positions, if we have a lot of healthcare clients out there listening now, appreciation is also very important and highly correlated at 0.63. And in their case, the person to whom I report cares about me as a person that has a high correlation of 0.635. And these are large samples. When we carve out nursing within our database, the sample base number is like 30,000. So very good information using a very large sample. For those in professional technical positions, You can see accountants, programmers, therapists, dietitians. Again, appreciation comes forth as being highly correlated. And when we work with clients, what we do is we look at the scores and how they relate to these statements. So if I were in a position where I was a leader over professional technical individuals and I saw that I had a low score in appreciation and it's highly correlated, that would be something I would need to work on. Or I might see a very high score in that particular organization and then know I could move on to some of the other factors in the work environment that are important. Then we see the same question again. The person to whom I report tries to be sensitive to each individual situation, is at a correlation level of 0.64, again indicating this is something that is highly likely to contribute to engagement in the workforce, and this sample size is some 21,000 individual employees in this database. For service positions, those are any positions that are, and even in the hotel industry, housekeeping, environmental services, grounds, maintenance. So the person to whom I report cares about me as a person, and the person to whom I report tries to be sensitive to each individual situation. So you're starting to see a very common theme in the sample size is around 8,000. As we indicate with clients, we will usually pull out more statements so that in these individual departments, the leaders can look at the total organization, look at engagement by position, and many times you'll see a variance. Looking at clerical administrative positions, those are individuals as administrative assistants, many times individuals that work in clerical positions in human resources. Again, appreciation is the top selection. Second one, trying to be sensitive to each employee's situation. But many times when we work with clients, one item that I find repeatedly that drives engagement in the clerical administrative areas is a need for more information. And to me, this makes sense. Many times they're on the front line providing information, and so it's very important for them to get accurate information so they can communicate appropriately. And this sample size is 13,000. So what is crucial for healthy organizations? We really have to use skilled communication. What I mean by that is communication where we regularly survey the perceptions of our employees and our leaders, and we plan communication. We have a communication plan. And I know in a lot of organizations you have individuals that are in charge of corporate communication. They're very skilled individuals that know how to develop a communication plan. But many times in smaller organizations, we don't have individuals with that skill set. So it's really important, and we can tell when we go in and do a survey what has been stressed in corporate communication. We can see, because there'll be high scores on certain perceptions, because that has repeatedly been communicated throughout the organization. We really use true collaboration between work units, between leaders, between multidisciplinary teams. We work in teams. We have highly functioning teams. We have effective decision making. When we see leadership teams that become have a higher level of disengagement, many times it relates to ineffective decision making. The decisions are not made in timely fashion. They're involved in projects, they finish a project, and yet they never hear whether they have approval to finalize the project. Appropriate staffing. Staffing is a given. We manage expectations in many of our organizations now. We're pretty lean in most organizations, but we communicate. And then we also know that employees can become disengaged if you have high turnover in a department, so you're constantly filling positions or hiring people, and it's almost like a sucking drain. They're sucked out of the organization because there's not appropriate staffing, and they become burned out from excessive overtime. That there's meaningful recognition. We have best practices where we help leaders develop recognition. Almost every organization I go into has some type of recognition program, but they may have developed it 10 years ago and it's become stale. We have to figure out new ways and better ways to recognize people at all generation levels, and that we are meeting their needs and recognizing them for functions that they perform in our organization, and we acknowledge them and value them for the work they do. We have to have authentic leadership that's real, and leadership that is honest and open and communicates with inspiration, I think, is the most important. And leadership that has a good way of prioritizing projects. Many of the organizations I go into, they use a shotgun approach. They have so many projects, they don't know which one to start on first. So a good leadership team can prioritize and say, okay, these are the top 3 priorities that we're going to work on this quarter, and then, of course, giving them the tools and resources to complete those projects. Boosting employee engagement. Hire for, and I'm being asked to speak at a recruiters association, and recruiters are so crucial, whether they're internal or external, of finding people with the right fit, hiring traits and behaviors that represent and match the organization, and that also are linked to engagement. And one of the ways I would advocate, and this could be a whole another webinar, is how to ask the right questions. You want to ask, and many of you, I'm sure, use competency-based or interviewing that is behavioral type interviewing to really drill down into this person's core set of values and then see if it matches your organization. We need to engage them from day one. We use the term onboarding, but we really have to be careful, and one of the ways that we monitor that is doing the STAY surveys, or the New Employee Index, which is a part of our baseline surveys, so that we can monitor that new hire experience, so that we don't get that turnover at 90 or 180 days, and monitoring not only that onboarding organizationally, but also what is happening within the department with leadership and with coworkers. What we do sometimes see in exit surveying is there's a sense of lack of appreciation from leadership at the department level with the new hires, or they are impacted by the disengaged employees within the work environment, and that will cause them to exit the organization. We have to be consistent. We have to set goals and stick to them and measure and monitor those goals along the way. And that's one thing that's great about surveying as well. We can set action plans into place and then set measures that many of our organizations now are doing kind of pulse checks. They'll do a baseline survey, an extensive engagement survey, and then we'll do a pulse check either at the top level organizationally with a sample size, or if they want department information, we'll survey using just a very short 15, 20 statement survey, and that works well to see if they're meeting their goals and to monitor the movement of opinion over time within their organization. This last one I love, because being in HR, I always felt like I communicated well, sometimes not, especially when it came to benefits and really being sure that everyone understood benefits throughout a very large organization. So communicating using different methods, being sure to measure the preference by surveying the preference for communication. It's great to email, but if nobody checks their emails, then that's not going to be effective communication. Being sure that our meetings are dialogue time and not just top-down communication. So these are all, we could go into a lot more detail on each one of them, and we train leaders on how to do this. We know, and you know certainly, those of you who've been in leadership roles, that it's all about building relationships, empowering relationships, being sure that people work well as teams and not in silos, developing and growing individuals without really having a good dialogue one-on-one you can't read people's minds and know how they want to grow and develop, what's important for them to learn, and where do they feel that development matches their current skill set. Being sure that we recognize both on an individual basis and then also having team rewards that for projects, for process improvement, for boosting client and customer patient satisfaction. Being sure that we recognize and just knowing what different teams are doing throughout an organization and rewarding that throughout the organization. Creating a culture that is going to take you where you need to go, that is aligned with your business strategies and will contribute to your success of the organization. So how do engaged employees boost the health of an organization? What we see out there today that we didn't see 10 years ago is that 50% of employees post messages or pictures or videos that are positive about their employer out there on their social media. And unfortunately, I've had a number of clients where something has happened within the organization and there have been negative messages out there. So very important to have messages that are positive, sharing praise and positive comments with others, and looking at these percentages, you can see how this would impact the perception both within your organization and then in your communities as well. They're likely to help boost the sales than uninvolved employees. They're more likely, and we do a question on our surveying to measure how likely an individual will recommend your organization. So this is an important fact to use as well as a metric for your organization. What happens if an organization has disengaged employees? What are some of the outcomes? What happens over time is that there may be a loss of sales, a decrease in revenue, lost clients, missed deadlines, dissatisfied customers and clients, poor external organization reputation. This can happen to any industry. You think about the automobile industry, you think about healthcare, you think about just recently a restaurant industry had some negative impact out in the community because of a high level of infections that were allegedly transmitted through a chain of restaurants. That goes back to disengaged employees. So very, very important to have a large percentage of engaged employees within your organization, no matter what type of industry you are. So how do we know if our organization is healthy or not? You knew this was coming. It comes back to whether you do your own internal survey, which lacks benchmark comparisons, but doing an organizational survey where you know what facility level of engagement there is, because you can have different facilities within an organization and varying levels of engagement. Department data that tells you at the grassroots level where you have high levels of engagement and where there are opportunities for enhancement. I remind senior leadership all the time to look at other metrics. Look at your employee engagement level along with the other key metrics you measure in your organization. In healthcare, we look at providers, and we can do pulse surveys so that we monitor that level of engagement over time. I pause as you read this, and I love this quote: the way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. And this is a Disney quote. Many of the organizations we work with, they struggle to make that decision, to invest dollars in developing a culture, in surveying their team members, and taking action on survey results. And truly, I believe this does impact the bottom line and certainly impacts your customers' experience with your organization. I appreciate your time today. If you have questions, you see on the screen our website, and I invite you to go to our website And then also our toll-free number is?
That is 1-800-554-0373.
We appreciate your attention, and we'll pause now to look for, we have a few minutes, about 10 minutes remaining for questions. If you feel more comfortable calling me, calling Suzanne Jackson, please call us. And if you're a current client, potential client, or just have a question out there, we live and breathe employee engagement every day, and we would be most happy to talk with you. Any questions that you'd like to type in at this point? Any technical details they need to do to type in the questions, Suzanne?
It does not appear so. If you do see on your screen, you can type in a question and we will answer it verbally at this point. Again, I would like to remind you all that we have attached this webinar PowerPoint for you as well. And so you can download that at any time. We have been recording this session. So if you would like to have a copy of the recording, what we plan to do is everyone who participated and or registered to attend this webinar, we will send out the recording of this presentation as well. So thank you all so much for participating. As I see no questions right now, again, if you would like to contact any of us, then we have the information here on the screen, and we would be more than happy to take time to answer any of your questions at any time you're available. So again, thank you all very much. Connie, thank you too.
You're most welcome. Have a great day.